In the picturesque suburb of Cedar Pines, the Dawson family appeared to be a portrait of domestic perfection. Their house, nestled among manicured lawns and flower beds, symbolized stability and success. James Dawson, a retired military officer with a firm but gentle demeanor, was a respected figure in the community, known for his integrity and a deep-seated belief in discipline. He had built his life on principles of honor and duty. His wife, Tina, complemented him perfectly. She was a devout homemaker, known for her adherence to traditional values. Together, they presented a united front, instilling respect and discipline in their daughters, Lena and Laura. Lena and Laura, identical twins with an eerie resemblance, were like two halves of the same soul. Their jet black hair framed identical features, sharp cheekbones, slender frames, and piercing green eyes that seemed to hold unspoken secrets. Even as young girls, they had been inseparable, a bond that went beyond mere sisterhood. They were quiet, polite, and well-mannered, and their unusual closeness only enhanced the image of a perfect, close-knit family. Teachers and neighbors often remarked on their charm and maturity, while others in the neighborhood looked up to the Dawsons as the epitome of family values. As Lena and Laura reached adolescence, their bond grew even more intense. While other siblings drifted into their own social circles, the twins only grew closer, developing their own private world within the confines of the Dawson home. They shared everything: secrets, hopes, dreams, and even emotions. Their connection was almost psychic, with each twin able to sense the other's thoughts and feelings without a word being spoken. But as they matured, they began to sense a new layer to their relationship, an emotional intensity that went beyond the boundaries of sisterly affection. They found themselves drawn to each other in a way that neither could explain, and their shared moments became tinged with a guilt they couldn't fully understand. At night, when the house lay silent, they would lie awake, whispering their feelings in the dark, each confessing the same confusing desires. This closeness was both a comfort and a curse, a secret they dared not share with anyone. As Lena and Laura reached adulthood, the weight of family expectations became stifling. The Dawsons were a family deeply rooted in tradition. Our appearances and reputation were paramount. James and Tina, proud of their role in the church and community, often reminded the twins of their duties as young women of high moral standing. Family dinners were laced with hints about courtship and marriage, and conversations focused on the twins' futures, always with the assumption that their paths would align with conservative ideals. Beneath their polite nods and forced smiles, however, Lena and Laura were beginning to feel suffocated. The twins shared a profound emotional connection that defied conventional labels, and as they grew older, this bond transformed into something deeper and more intense. In the privacy of their room, they would confess to each other feelings of confusion and guilt. The intimacy they shared was both a sanctuary and a source of shame, something they could not share with anyone else, especially not their parents. Their parents began to sense an odd distance growing between them and their daughters, who seemed to withdraw more each day. But instead of seeing this as a cry for understanding, James and Tina dismissed it as typical teenage rebellion or simple disobedience. The pressure to conform to hide their bond, to maintain the faith, strained the twins to a breaking point. They felt trapped between their parents' suffocating expectations and the reality of their love, which was their only source of comfort. One evening, their parents' suspicions reached a peak. Tina had been carefully observing her daughters, feeling that something was terribly wrong. She noticed the way they would exchange glances during family gatherings or the unusual amount of time they spent locked in their room, speaking in hushed tones. Unable to bear the mystery any longer, Tina confronted them, demanding to know what was going on. The conversation quickly escalated. James, firm in his conviction, told the girls that whatever secret they were hiding needed to end. Lena and Laura sat in silence, looking down, their faces blank as they avoided eye contact. The pressure became unbearable, and Laura, in a moment of desperation, confessed that she and Lena were not just sisters. Their relationship was something deeper, something they couldn't simply turn off or change. A room fell silent as James and Tina absorbed what they had just heard. Their initial shock quickly turned into disgust and rage. Tina cried, calling them abominations, saying she could never look at them the same way again. James, meanwhile, muttered about getting them help, talking about therapy and religious counseling. The twins sat there, feeling stripped and exposed, their parents' betrayal twisting the knife in their hearts. The love they had once felt for their family shattered in that moment, replaced by a cold, growing resentment. In the days following the confrontation with their parents, Lena and Laura's lives turned into a regimented nightmare. Their world was now defined by tight schedules, constant surveillance, and daily doses of shame masked as concerned guidance. James and Tina were determined to stamp out what they saw as sickness, enforcing strict separation between the twins and enrolling them in church counseling. Each counseling session felt like an attack, with the pastor using scriptures to denounce their bond and label it as something sinful. The twins were subjected to sermons about purity and family values, being reminded at every turn that their feelings were not only wrong but fundamentally evil. The girls grew hollow and emotionally numb, enduring this routine without protest, but with growing resentment. They began to lose hope that their parents would ever understand or accept them. The constant guilt and shame weighed on them, leaving them trapped between who they truly were and who they were being forced to become. It was an unbearable prison of the heart and mind. One evening, Laura quietly broke down in their shared bathroom, unable to face the reality of a life condemned to repression. Lena found her there, crumpled and despondent, and it was in that moment that they realized they had nothing left to lose. If they couldn't live freely, they couldn't bear to live at all. They felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them the most, and for the first time, they began to consider the unthinkable escape, not just from their home, but from everyone who refused to accept them. Together, they made a silent pact that they would either live free or not live at all. With newfound resolve, Lena and Laura began planning their escape. Initially, it was an abstract dream, but as their desperation grew, so did the clarity of their plans. They decided they would leave in the dead of night, slipping away from the home that had become their prison. However, as they considered the depths of their parents' hold over them, they realized that leaving without truly breaking free would mean a life spent in hiding, or ever haunted by the fear of being found. In whispered conversations, they decided that there was only one way to ensure their freedom. Their plan transformed from one of simple escape to something much darker. They would sever the ties that bound them permanently, erasing the source of their pain by taking matters into their own hands. The idea both terrified and excited them, filling them with an odd sense of liberation. It felt as if they were finally taking control of their lives, though the cost was unthinkable. They meticulously planned every detail, the timing, the tools, and their route. Lena acquired a flashlight and gloves, while Laura obtained a wrench and a small bag to carry essentials. Each day, as they went about their forced routine, they concealed their intentions, biding their time until they could execute their desperate plan. On the night they had chosen, they went through their checklist one last time, their breaths heavy with anticipation and dread. They clung to each other in the dark, knowing this might be their last night together, feeling a powerful, unspoken bond of love and desperation. The night was dense with silence as Lena and Laura made their way through the house, each footstep feeling heavier than the last. The house that had once been a safe haven now felt like a suffocating trap, every familiar shadow transformed into something sinister. They moved with caution, every creak of the floorboard amplifying their fear that they'd be caught before they could carry out their plan. The darkness was their ally, cloaking them in secrecy as they entered their parents' room. Inside, James and Tina lay peacefully, unaware of the turmoil in their daughters' minds. Lena and Laura stood side by side at the foot of the bed, their hearts racing and their hands shaking. They exchanged one final, silent look of reassurance, each twin finding a reflection of their own determination and fear in the other's gaze. This was the moment they had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. In their minds, it was an act of liberation, a final act of defiance against the parents who had sought to reshape them, who had tried to break their spirits in their bond. They held each other's hands tightly, grounding each other in their last act as a united front. Lena pressed a pillow over her father's face while Laura, holding a heavy wrench, positioned herself near their mother. But as their actions escalated, so did the horror of what they were doing. Tina stirred, her eyes fluttering open, instantly widening in terror as she understood the scene before her. She let out a muffled scream, and in that moment, the reality of their actions crashed down on the twins. They were overcome with both revulsion and determination, pushing through the grotesque reality of what they had planned. When it was over, the room was deathly silent again, but the air was thick with an irreversible shift. Lena and Laura were left standing, their breaths shallow and ragged as they took in the scene before them. The horror of their actions settled in as they silently packed their belongings, their faces pale and their bodies moving on autopilot. They knew they couldn't stay in this house. Not now. Not ever again. They walked through the front door and into the night, their steps echoing in the empty streets as they carried the weight of what they'd done with them. The night sky stretched infinitely above them, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic nightmare they had just escaped. They felt a twisted sense of liberation, a freedom that was tainted by the horror of their actions. They kept walking, hand in hand, each step taking them further from their home and deeper into a future unknown. As dawn broke over Cedar Pines the morning after the tragedy, the neighborhood's calm was shattered. Yellow police aides surrounded the once picturesque Dawson family home, its cheerful exterior now a haunting backdrop for a crime that no one could fathom. Neighbors gathered in shock, whispering in disbelief, their faces pale as police cars and forensic teams swarmed the property. A tragedy rocked Cedar Pines to its core, bringing an almost voyeuristic frenzy to the quiet suburban community as people struggled to reconcile the horrific news with the family they thought they knew. Inside the house, investigators worked methodically, combing through each room to piece together the story of what happened that night. In the twins' shared bedroom, detectives found journals with pages upon pages of handwritten entries. Each entry offered a glimpse into Lena and Laura's world's secret notes, hidden confessions, and tales of isolation and confinement under their parents' strict rules. The journals told a story that the family had kept well hidden from the world, a world where Lena and Laura were seen less as beloved daughters and more as projects to mold, their individuality quashed in favor of obedience. The evidence painted a chilling picture for law enforcement and psychological experts alike. Photos of the crime scene captured signs of a life lived under immense pressure, neatly arranged books on self-discipline, stern family mottos displayed on the walls, and reminders of strict house rules everywhere. The experts recognized that the twins' desperate act had been fueled by a unique bond and a shared perception of entrapment. They described the twins as having a pathologically enmeshed relationship, where their need for each other had been heightened to the point of mutual dependency due to the intense emotional deprivation they endured. In the meantime, Lena and Laura were fugitives. They had fled to a rundown motel in the outskirts of a nearby town, hiding in plain sight. They spent each day in silence, staring blankly at the cracked ceiling, too haunted by what they'd done to process any future plans. Their initial sense of liberation had quickly turned into an oppressive weight that neither twin could bear alone, and though they still found comfort in each other's presence, the realization of their actions hung between them like a shadow, thick and unspoken. It wasn't long before law enforcement closed in on their location. Lena and Laura had left behind traces in their escape of abandoned items, brief ATM withdrawals, and within a week, officers surrounded the motel. When the police entered, they found the girls sitting side by side on the motel bed, hands clasped as they stared forward, resigned. They didn't speak or resist. They simply held each other's hands as if bracing themselves for the separation they knew was coming. As they were handcuffed and lead out, reporters and onlookers swarmed, cameras flashing and microphones thrust in their faces. Yet the twins remained silent, their eyes downcast, saying nothing. Their stoic expressions gave little away, leaving the public to interpret what lay beneath. To many, they appeared cold and remorseless, yet those closest to the story saw them as tragic figures, two deeply bonded souls who had lost themselves in the depths of their connection. A trial that followed was one of the most sensational events Cedar Pines had ever seen, attracting attention far beyond the town. People across the country became captivated by the story of the Dawson twins, trying to make sense of a crime that seemed both unthinkable and unavoidable. Experts, journalists, and the public speculated endlessly. Were Lena and Laura simply born bad, or were they products of an oppressive environment that had warped their sense of reality? Psychologists, sociologists, and family dynamics experts were brought in to provide insight into the case. Some argued that Lena and Laura's relationship had developed into what is called pathological dependency, where their identities were so intertwined that they could no longer differentiate between themselves. This bond, compounded by the rigid control their parents enforced, had ultimately driven them to an act of desperate liberation. Witnesses for the defense claimed that the girls had suffered environmental abuse, a subtle but powerful form of psychological harm, where love was withheld unless they complied, a tactic that had left the twins feeling trapped and hopeless. The prosecution, on the other hand, portrayed the twins as ruthless and calculating, arguing that they had not only planned but meticulously carried out the murder of their parents in cold blood. The district attorney called it a distorted and dangerous bond, claiming that the twins had allowed their attachment to one another to override their morality. Though they admitted the girls had been raised in a strict environment, they argued it did not justify murder. A jury's verdict was delivered in a packed courtroom. Both Lena and Laura were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, and in that moment, the finality of their fate settled over the twins. For the first time since their capture, they looked visibly shaken, clinging to each other in an embrace that neither wanted to end, fully understanding that their lives together would be reduced to memories. Once the trial concluded, the impact of their story rippled through Cedar Pines. The Dawson home, once admired for its pristine appearance, became a symbol of the tragedy, its windows dark and empty, a constant reminder of the family's fall from grace. People avoided the house, and it soon became known as the Cursed House, an unspoken warning to others in the neighborhood about the dangers of pushing loved ones to their limits. News outlets debated the broader implications of the Dawson twins story for years. Psychological experts warned of the dangers of strict, overly controlling parenting that limits children's sense of self, a dynamic that can force bonds to intensify to the point of dependency. Others reflected on the unique nature of twin relationships, where an inherent closeness can become a survival mechanism under extreme pressure. For better or worse, schools in Cedar Pines introduced more programs to support mental health and encourage open family communication, hoping to prevent such tragedies in the future. Parents who once viewed the Dawsons as the ideal family found themselves questioning their own parenting philosophies, wondering if unyielding control could lead to similar fractures in their children's lives. Over time, Lena and Laura's story faded from national headlines, but for the people of Cedar Pines, it remained a haunting lesson. Their tale became a cautionary story, recounted in whispers, a tragic reminder of what can happen when love is twisted into something suffocating, when boundaries are blurred to the point that neither person can breathe. For years, those who had known Lena and Laura, or had seen the tragedy unfold, continued to reflect on the tragedy that had taken place. People talked about the twins with a mix of pity, horror, and sadness, and the town became a little quieter, its people a little more hesitant to judge what they couldn't understand. The tragedy of the Dawson twins remained forever a part of Cedar Pines, a lasting reminder of the high price that can be paid when people are forced into molds that break them, and a symbol of the dangers of a love that binds rather than frees. If you enjoyed this suspenseful story and want to dive into more tales of mystery, tragedy, and the unexpected, make sure to like this post. Your support helps us bring more captivating stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for regular updates on similar stories that explore the dark, mysterious, and often haunting aspects of human nature. We dive into thrilling and thought-provoking narratives every week.